Today's podcast is supported by David Smith of Edward Jones. Are you happy with your financial strategy? Or maybe like to see what other opportunities are out there? Well, give David a call at 469-372-1587. That's 469-372-1587. David is only concerned about one person, that's you and your financial health. So check him out, David Smith, Edward Jones, 469-372-1587. Hey everybody, it's the Trout, and welcome to another episode of The Trout Show. Thanks for watching, and I hope you're having a great day. Many of you are probably familiar with this product, which is a CD. Still popular in Europe, not very popular in America. This happens to be the 93 album from Robert Plant, Fate of Nations. Great album if you haven't heard it. There's some great songs on there. But before that, we had different types of ways to listen to music. When I was a kid, and I mean just a little kid, my parents still had 78s. Which were big round discs that were made out of hard shellac that played at 78 RPMs on the record player, and they were all in mono. Then came along the LPs, which stood for long playing, which these were made out of plastic or vinyl, which we call now, and they played at 33 1/3 RPMs on your record player. And after that, it was 45s, which you could do two songs on, one on both sides. Then we went to 8 tracks, which were just a fun thing to listen to. They didn't last long because they were so a painful thing to fast forward and all this stuff, but I had those in my car. Then we went to cassettes, and then we went to CDs, and you know where we are now, streaming. But what's interesting is a lot of people have gone back to wanting vinyl, which is what they call it now. Plastic records is really what it is, pressed so you could play them on a record player. And today, in this episode, I talked to one of the few people and companies that make vinyl records. And luckily, they're right here in North Texas and Addison, Texas. They're called Handdrawn Pressings. Dustin Blocker is the guy, one of the people that started the company, and he was kind enough to sit down and talk about the process of how they make vinyl records now and how many people still want them. And I mean, if you go out and buy one, they're like $30 a piece. I was telling Dustin, I said, I remember my first stereo album I got it for Christmas in 1965. I won't tell you how old it was. It's called Beatles 65. Great album. It was in stereo, and it was not like stereo nowadays. Everything was on one side, drums on one side, vocals. It was kind of weird, but that's the way they did it back then. But today's story is about how Dustin and his partners came along and said, we want to start making vinyl records. Now, you wouldn't think that would really be popular, but his company, Handdrawn Pressings, is running 24/7, 365. That's how more popular vinyl records have become. So I hope you enjoy this episode. It's kind of geeky because it's one of those things we get into how they actually make vinyl records. Hasn't changed any. It does the same thing. But to me, it's very interesting how this process still continues after, 80 years of coming along, or 70 years that they started making records like that. So up next, Dustin Blocker, Handdrawn Pressings, talking about how vinyl records are making a comeback all over the world. That's next on The Trout Show. Are you a musician?
Yeah. So I was a singer in a band for 17 years. Exit 380 was actually out of Denton, which
because 380. Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So I started. It was a college band to begin with, and guess what? We went to UNT, North Texas, and
yeah.
We were real creative. Yeah, we were the guitarist and I at the time were driving back and forth to work, and the billboards. There was like a billboard in Louisville, I think it was, and it said something about Exit 380, and I was like, oh, that's a good name for a band. And so originally it was kind of a way to have roots and where you're from, and but yeah, we played 17 years. I had most of the same guys in the band.
Wow. What did you play? What kind of music? What kind of music, and what did you play in the band? Or were you just singing?
So I was a singer, and kind of the guy that did everything as far as scheduling rehearsals and keeping everybody lined out and booking shows and all that good stuff.
The fun stuff.
So that was kind of the background of getting all those kind of weird pieces and messes kind of cleaned up. That all started back in the singing right at the tail end of college. And then ended 7-8 years ago, stopped doing that. And I sing at churches and stuff locally in Texas now. And that's as much as I get on stage anymore, which is kind of nice. Get to sleep at night
Yeah.
and all that.
Yeah.
Kind of with owning
Yeah.
a business. Sleep as much as you can.
So you did that. You obviously made some money at it, I assume, because you wouldn't have done it for
Yep.
17 years. How big an area
Yep.
did you
Yep.
travel?
Oh, we traveled all through the U.S. Mainly, within about 5 states. This was kind of our bread and butter, all through the South, and all the way up to Kansas from Texas. We'd kind of hit Texas and back. But yeah, for 3, 4 years, I didn't even have a regular job besides singing in a band. Right? We do as much. It was a rock and roll band for the most part. As we got a little bit older and started having wives and kids, it kind of got a little
Yep.
softer and started bringing out ukuleles and banjos and harmonicas and whatever. But yeah, that whole journey actually led to how we got to vinyl, which is the business that I'm in now. So it was just that necessity to record my own stuff.
It's funny because when I look at vinyl, that's what I grew up on,
Sure.
So when my parents, when they had their records, they started out with 78s, which weren't
Hmm.
vinyl. They were made of whatever,
Yeah, shellac.
bakelite or shellac, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So my mom and dad had an old 78 player, and I'd play stuff there was just stuff from the 50s and stuff like that. And then when the 33s came along, that's what everybody was buying.
That's right.
I've been through so many different types of music, and then and everybody, I couldn't, as a kid, my first stereo album was Beatles 65 because it was in stereo.
Hmm.
And I'm like, oh my God, it's stereo.
No more mono. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And of course, back then they mixed everything to one side. All the drums are on the right, all the
That's
singers on
right.
the left, and it's like, oh, well,
I
it's
love
stereo.
it.
And then,
They still recorded in 4 tracks. That's right.
yeah,
They
they
were
were
still
doing four
recording 4 tracks.
tracks. And when they did Sergeant Pepper's, they did eight, but then they put them together, which probably was a nightmare to try to sync those things.
That's right.
Um, and then as cassettes came along, I would then get a vinyl, get a record, and then I'd record it on cassettes because that's what I had in my car. Well,
That's
actually,
right.
I'm sorry, before that was 8-track. So we had the 8-track
Uh-huh.
players, and it took you like 5 minutes to get fast forward to the three songs that you wanted to hear.
That's
And
right.
little 5x7 speakers in the car, and we thought that sounded cool. And then we went to cassettes because then I'd take the record out of the jacket, play it one time, take my record cleaner, disc, I think
Hmm.
it was called disc cleaner or whatever it was called,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
record it once and I put it back. That way I wouldn't
Yeah.
have the vinyl or
Only
anything.
time you touched it. That's funny. That's funny that you hit a couple things in there. One was 8 tracks. That was my childhood, right?
Yeah.
Vinyl was it was still around. I was born in '79, so by the time I start remembering recorded music, it was the 8 tracks, Barry Manilow in the back of the station wagon, right? Um, and then and then the cassettes. That was my older brother. He's I have two older brothers, 8, 9 years older than me,
Yeah.
and so they were real heavy into Genesis and all that, and they had those tapes, and then you started mixtapes. That was the whole thing.
Yeah, I
But
never
then you,
did that, but I knew people that did. Yeah, I remember when the
oh yeah,
mixtapes that was in the 80s when that came in.
recording off the radio. You record the radio.
Yeah. And so now here we are, decades later. When did you start the vinyl company then, the record company?
Yeah, so I think I alluded to it a little bit earlier. So my band, we had 8 full-length releases and a handful of EPs that we recorded. And it was all to CD at that time, except for the last one. I honestly, we recorded it in 2013, released it in the fall, no, in the summer of 14. And I still remember, I honestly couldn't tell you how it got on my radar, but we had been in a band, I had the same band for a long time, like I said. We kind of
Hmm.
changed styles. Um, and I said, hey guys, you know what we should do? We should record to vinyl. Let's make a side A rock album and a side B a more Americana, folky kind of thing. Because
Yeah.
we're kind of still dabbling in both. And so everybody loved the idea because we had kind of gotten away from that harder edge rock. I don't know if it was hard edge, but electric guitars and singing loud and all that fun
Right.
stuff. And so it was still fun, right? And I wanted us to have some fun. And so I thought, let's do it on that format. That would be fun. So what was interesting though, so we recorded, we spent, a year or whatever in the studio,
Yeah.
10 months, I think. And then I went to go find, now it's time to make it. Couldn't find anywhere to make it in the States.
Nope.
Couldn't do it. This is 2014. So oddly enough, I was working at a corporation at the time in Richardson, and my now business partner, we were hanging out eating lunch together. I was still playing live, and he was a big music fan, and he knew I had started a record label. I started in 2011. That's Handdrawn Records. So Handdrawn Pressing hadn't wasn't even a thought yet. So he
Right.
goes, "Hey, you're in the music business, right?" I was like, "Yeah, I have a little label." And he goes, "Is there any money in it?" I go,
No.
"No." I go, "There's going to be in vinyl though." He's like, "What are you talking about?" So I was basically told him, "Come, I'm telling you, there was nowhere to get it. Like I knew I wanted it. I couldn't even tell you honestly why I knew I wanted it, or there weren't even like there are now Crosley record players at Walmart and all that. There was no way to even get a record player
No. No.
back in 2014. But I was like, it's growing. It's this thing. I've been watching it, and I just went through the troubles of trying to get one made. And the product came out okay, and I'm not super happy with it. And I wish that I had a service that I could have used that would have been better. And that's really what the original business model, if you were, it was how do we solve that problem? Because there were some plants. I think there was maybe 20 in the world, 15 to 20, if you could figure out how to find them
Yeah.
in the world at that point.
Yep.
Um, and so we just kind of went on this odyssey of searching to try to figure it out. And that was 2014. We became partners at the end of that year. 2015 was brokering, putting together a business plan. In 16, I was going out to engineers, looking up how records were made, what was a record pressing technology, calling up
Yeah.
people saying, "Hey, can you make one of these?" And kind of going real deep into it all. And then a German company posted in early 16 that they had made the first manual record presses in 30 some odd years. And so I go, okay, fine, done, business plan, let's go. So start putting together a business plan with, like I said, my business partner, and we go,
Right.
okay, what's that going to take, and people, and all that stuff, and what's the cost, and we had pretty much finished out what the financials would be on that, and then a Canadian company, who's what we went through, said they had an automatic one. So I found literally in the deep web somewhere a website with a 3D rendering of what the machine would be. So we booked a plane ticket up to Toronto, and flew up there and saw like a Frankenstein, not production model press, but it was making records and nobody was doing anything. It was just making them. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, it's possible,
Yeah.
because everything we had used up to that point was 1960s stuff. There was a guy in town in Dallas, A&R Records, Stan Getz, that had been around since the 60s, literally on Riverside Boulevard, kind of close to Mavs, American Airlines,
Right.
and he was still making records, and that's who we were using. And we had a bunch of local artists, including myself, that we had all known, and so we were kind of making records with him. And he was busy. I mean, he was running in the summer with no AC in Texas, closing at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because he was
Oh yeah.
dying. Right?
Can't imagine why.
Woo! But yeah, so we launched actually with the first new record presses in the planet in January of 2017, and it's been wild ever since.
So is there, because I remember I've seen videos or not videos, but watching how they used to press. So
Right.
in Capital, these giant, like Capital and Reaper, they all of them had their big giant manufacturing plants.
That's right.
And you could see the thing where it just push whatever that little gobago, vinyl was, and push it down
Biscuit.
and
Yep.
biscuit. I knew you had a name for it.
Oh
Push
yeah.
the biscuit down and press it out, and then they had a little machine that lathed it off the edge and all that stuff.
That's right.
So what I always wanted to know, because is there a difference? Because so much of it now, everything's digital now. I mean, recording,
Yeah.
everybody's recording. There's some people that still want to record in analog. I don't know why, but they do. Is there a difference engineering a product that goes to vinyl versus going to streaming?
Yeah, absolutely. It's in the mastering.
So
The
you have to have
engineering's
somebody
not
else
gonna.
master it. You can't. You have to real like Bob Ludwig, who used to do whatever it was. He
You got
Bob
it.
no Bob Clearmountain. That was the guy that, because I had a CD out in '94
Hmm.
and I'd send it out to mastering company. So they have to know how to master for vinyl.
Yeah. So these mastering companies now, it's pretty cool. So I get to go to all these different like mastering camps and go to Nashville and hear from these guys. And basically, the nuts and bolts is CD, you master it one way, streaming, you master it another way, digital downloads another way, and it actually breaks down even by platform on the streaming. So They will
Wow.
master for Pandora differently than Spotify, different than
Yeah, I do know
YouTube
that.
Music and all
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then vinyl, though, the best thing is they have the most space. So digital mastering, as you know, is a lot about compression. So like the loudness wars of CD was how loud can you get a CD? And it's all about compression and getting it real loud without clipping and all that. Vinyl is a lot different. So it's more in the craft side of it. So you have a much more space to use, but that all contingent about how long your sides are. So if you go back and you were referencing earlier, kind of the heyday of vinyl, the 70s, let's say, the album format, there was a reason that your rock tunes were track one, track two, track three, and then ballads started coming in 4 to 5, and then same thing on the other side. That's actually because of the way that intergroove distortion works on a vinyl record.
Oh, wow. I
As you
didn't
get
know that.
closer to the center, yeah, you have less space, and
Yeah.
so you're more apt to distortion regardless of what you do. And so now it's kind of a teaching all these artists now that are on the digital front. Hey, how you put your track listing together is wildly important. Also, maybe more important is how much side time per side that you can fit on a regular 33 RPM 12-inch record is going to be contingent upon, right, how much time you have. So, you want to 22 is like should be
It's
your
going to say around
max.
20 minutes. I remember that.
hmm
Yeah.
18 is like now the cutting engineer, which is I'll get to that in a second. Cutting engineer can like max you out. Like you want DBs to be cranking and you
Right.
want it real loud.
Yeah.
Less time per side, they can get you whatever you want. The more time per side, it's going to get quieter. Then on the manufacturer side, we get complaints, hey, this record's really quiet next to this other album. It's like that's not how vinyl works. It's not CD,
Yeah.
right? They are standalone units. And that's why a lot of receivers, even for that you're going to use for your vinyl decks, don't have it by numbers. It's just a slider, etc. Because it shouldn't really matter that it's 30, -30,
Right.
10,
Right.
5,
Yeah.
whatever. Because it's just how loud that record should sound. Because they're all wildly different. But to answer the question, the engineers or the mastering engineers, they effectively shouldn't put very much compression on, and that allows the cutting engineer, which is the second actual person,
Hmm.
to cut in real time your masters into a physical disc, which then through a series of processes comes to us as a pressing plant to then stamp out your records in mass.
Now, don't you get I don't know what it's made of, a metal plate, the
Yep.
master? It's metal, isn't
Yep.
there? Some kind of metal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll
So
walk
it's
through.
a
It's pretty cool.
reverse. It's a reverse. So when you pour it in,
Yeah, you
it
got it
goes into
right.
the grooves. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll walk through. It's pretty easy to think about. So you have, okay, you said it earlier, you could do it on tape, you could do it on digital.
Right.
You send it to us. We send it to a studio. Okay. The studio has a cutting engineer. They have a huge lathe, and it looks like a record player basically in the
Yeah.
middle with a huge stylus. It's cutting into what's called a lacquer. So a
Hmm. I know
lacquer
about.
is a
Yeah.
steel plate, and then they pour kind of the way they make chocolate right over candy bars. Lacquer drips over it, and then it makes it and forms it. And it's a super clean, shiny record looking surface. And it's
Hmm.
larger than a record, typically 14 inches. And then they cut in real time. This your side A, and that's one lacquer they put to the side. Side B, they cut in real time, put it to the side. Then they take it and they do electroplating. So they take it and spray it with a thin deal of silver
Hmm.
nitrate, and then
Okay.
they put it into baths of nickel. So these hard nickel pellets, actually through electroplating, get formed onto that lacquer.
Mm.
Then when they're finished after a couple hours, they literally peel it off, and you have what you just said, the negative or the inverse,
Right.
and that's your master. And then from that, you make your duplicates of the master, and those are the inverse of that. So it's just the opposite, opposite, opposite. We get the opposite at the plant. It's called a stamper because we're stamping into the
Right.
plastic.
Yeah.
So then we get in these nickel stampers, and they break after about 1,000 units. So if we're running 10,000 unit project, we need 10 sets of stampers, right?
Well.
And we physically put them into the machine, and they look like silver records,
Yeah.
or a platinum
I've
record
seen them.
on a
Yeah.
wall.
Yeah.
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 And
That would be
then,
the platinum
yeah,
record.
the
That's
platinum,
what the
exactly,
platinum. That's what it would
exactly.
be.
So you have, so then in the record press, it's actually 3 machines. It's pretty cool to see. You guys can look this up on YouTube or whatever, and we have bunches of videos of it. So you're going to do an extruder. So it's electrical heat. You're melting down all these little tiny pieces of plastic into what's called a biscuit or a puck. It comes into the press, and then a pin drops and holds it in place along with the two center labels, right? So those are actually not stickers; they're actual center labels. Are paper.
They're
So the
paper. I
paper
knew
has to
that.
withstand the heat. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the paper comes in, the pin drops through, and so it's side A, audio A, side B, and the paper deal, and then the pin holds it. And then as the press closes, that's the second part of the machine, the plastic it squeezes out from the
Hmm.
middle.
Yeah.
And so you have it's a little, the records are thicker in the middle than they are on the outer diameters. And then the last part of the machine, the third part, is the trimming station. And you alluded to it that in the old days, a physical person would pick it up on a manual press and take it and put on another machine and hit go, and it trims off the excess. In our presses, that's automatic. So a swing arm grabs the unfinished record, drops it, a knife cuts it, then another arm grabs it and drops it onto a spindle for cooling. And that's it. I mean, as soon as it drops, it goes from 300 degrees puck down to room temperature like that, because in the press you're doing super hot steam and chilled water. Within about 30 seconds, you have a record.
Do
That's the
you?
process, and it's always been the same. Yeah,
Yeah. So here's a question as a producer myself. Do
sure.
you lose any fidelity going from one to the next type of,
So the
you got four different types. I assume you're losing something in there. And if that's
yeah,
true, then the engineers would have to know that and have to fix it when they're mastering. They have to think about that even when they're doing that, I assume too, right?
you're talking about on the digital masters going to the
Well,
cutter.
so you said you make the first one,
Mm.
then you
Oh,
make
right, right,
another
right.
copy of that, and then you make another copy of that. Are you losing
Oh,
fidelity?
no,
No, you
no.
don't
Oddly
lose it.
enough, so when that master, that it could be called a father or a mother.
Okay.
We don't have to get in the weeds about
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
but
yeah. I understand. I understand.
um, so that well, I'll say master just easier to conceptualize. So that master itself, once it's into metal, it's good to go. You can typically rip off stampers to make about 100,000 units off of
Oh wow,
one,
wow.
what's called the mother or the master, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that leads to things like very, very popular pressings. Let's just use, I don't know, Led Zeppelin 4. There's a reason now why on Discogs the Japanese pressing or the English pressing or the French, whatever, is wildly sought after, because back in those days and even to this day, if you were going to make runs that large, that mother can only last for X amount of stampers being ripped off before that mother's destroyed. So
Right.
just like the stampers get destroyed in our record presses, the mother, through transfer, it gets torn apart too. That's probably why it's called a mother. Probably having a lot of babies is kind of hard on a woman, right?
Sure.
And so it's just hard on the mother. And so it's just
Yeah.
hard on it, and eventually is no good. So you have to go back and cut another master. And so since it's a human cutting it, maybe it's a different human cutting it, and he cuts it different.
Oh
He
wow.
cuts it hotter than the last guy.
Yeah.
And so that's why you'll hear Zeppelin 4, it's a hot cut. Oh,
Ah.
I want that one. It's $1,000 versus this other one's only 600
Right.
bucks or whatever.
Oh
And
wow.
it's the original pressing, never been opened. And it's because it was cut by a different guy 5 years after the original or 6 months after the original, because they're making them millions and millions and millions of these discs. And they literally have to just recut it and start back over and start back over and start back over.
That's just amazing to me. And and you think about when I grew up on that, we concerned about your financial health and reach out to David Smith with Edward Jones. 469-372-1587. That's 469-372-1587. He can conduct business where you are. Get your financial health checkup with David Smith with Edward Jones. His number one concern is you. That's David Smith with Edward Jones. 469-372-1587. I used to buy albums because I'd go with a friend of mine, we'd go buy albums to look at the cover. We'd look at the cover and go, oh, that sounds like good. Let's go buy it. And
Sure.
sometimes it sucked. I'll just be honest, it
Of
sucked.
course.
You're getting and going like, well, these people suck, or you
That's
get
right.
one, you buy the album for a song and the rest of the album, 11
All the
songs,
time.
10 of them suck, and one, the big famous song is really big, and the
That's
rest of
right.
them, like, man, what were they doing the rest of the time? But I didn't know. I mean, because records were so cheap, I
Yeah,
mean, relative to what people were making.
sure.
So, and even though I understand, I've seen the microscopic grooves. I still don't get it. I mean, I've seen how
Yeah.
the undulations and all that stuff, and I'm going like, I don't get it. So I don't get it
Yeah.
radio either. So it's like, I don't understand it. You know what I mean?
Well, well, you know what?
Digital, I can get. It's like 1 and 0, 1 and 0, 1 and 0.
Yeah.
And,
Well,
go
I
ahead.
was gonna say, no. I think what's funny about that is you nailed it. Is when people, well, young people, say young people, when they see a waveform on a computer screen,
Yeah.
that's actually the
It's
visual representation of what a groove looks like in a record.
yeah. Yep.
That's digital is a representation of everything physical,
That's
and that's
true.
where they got that idea of it doing this. Is that that's what it looks like when you look through a microscope. That's what it goes. It goes left and right. So the up side to side is left and right, and how far the needle goes down is the low end to the high end. How's it work? I have asked
Yeah.
Edison. I have no. He's the one that came up with it. It doesn't make it. It's crazy. I can even understand how maybe sound waves could come out of something like that, but
Yeah.
how can a human voice be duplicated? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, and you know what people spent money on back in the 70s, even in the 60s, really turned into a much more audiophile in the late 60s, early 70s, when you had people like
Yeah.
Macintosh and people go, I'm not getting a solid state. I'm going to get a tube amp to run this. And my cartridge and then you're going to get direct drive turntable, and you're going to have a
That's right.
cartridge that's like $3,000. And that thing, if you just breathe on it, it's going to move because it's just barely like, and we
That's
used to
right.
spend hours arguing. That's how I got started, to be honest with you, started reading specs.
Mm,
Well, in Flutter, 20 to 20,000, all that stuff, because, back then it was a big deal. Like, oh my God, it's got, whatever it is. And you're like, look at this. And of course, then the equipment had to meet the criteria, but that all changed when digital came out,
yeah.
because then
Yeah.
it all changed and you had people going, well, it's too harsh and all that stuff. I asked one time, when CDs came out, I went to producer one time. I said, "All right, how close is this to the original recording?"
Mm,
This is before I went in the studio. He says, "Well, it's kind of close." So
mm,
then I went in the studio in '94 and recorded for my first album. And I'm sitting there, and I think I came back after I had my CD and put it in, and that's when I found, you could tell the difference. It was like you're
sure.
listening to the master right there, and now you put the CD on, it loses at something. Now you don't know that
Yeah. Yeah.
until you're listening to it next to each other.
That's right.
So I had no idea that this process was so complicated, because I mean, when I grew up, there's millions of records. I mean, that's what you sold. Why did you think, going into this business, that you saw a need? And more importantly, why do you think that there are people now going? I mean, they're not people my age. These are younger people buying vinyl. What is it about it now? They're grabbing a hold of that. Not the artist, but the person that listens to it. What do you think drives them to that now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we talk about this all the time, and the consensus is pretty. I have my own personal opinion. I mean, I think that the young generation, the iPhone has now been out long enough that they've grown up with music in their hand
Right.
and maybe in their car, and depending on what their parents' car, their own car sound system sounded like, that's as good as it was going to be. And
Yeah.
especially backing up maybe even 5 years ago, before you had lossless and all that and streaming, you had Pandora and all that. So you were listening. If you put on an MP3, it's like squished down to here in the middle of your dash if you're
Yep.
driving down the road,
Yep.
as opposed to an actual WAV file, which is over here. So, and now CD players don't even exist in new cars, by the way, and hadn't for the last 8 years.
I
That's
know.
unbelievable.
It's like if you were on the radio, oh my goodness, oh my Lord
Oh,
Almighty, you were the big
oh,
time.
it was huge. Yeah, we had a local radio station would play our stuff, and we had a TV. We even had a TV station here that would. It was Mark Cuban's network at the time in Dallas, and it would play our music videos. And I was just like, this is crazy. But yeah, to I think you're exactly on the right track. The young people drive it because their knowledge of music was this small thing, like I said, in the middle of their dash or off their phone as they're holding it to their phone. And when they finally went to a concert for the first time, they go, "Whoa, this is what music can sound like." Now, then the closest accurate representation of studio or a live concert experience is a vinyl record, and it, especially if you have even a decent setup. You
Yeah.
hear things that you literally can't hear
Yeah.
otherwise, and you go, wow. I mean, and so I think that drives it in a big way. I remember even um, this had to be almost 10 years ago. I remember putting Rocket Man, Elton John's Rocket Man, on a turntable, and it's just a decent setup. And I mean, how many times in your life you heard Rocket Man?
Oh
One
yeah,
good
Mike.
billion.
Yeah.
In the
Gazillion.
mall, and when
Yeah.
malls used to exist, all that.
Yeah.
And I still remember hearing his foot on the foot pedal, of the piano. I was like, oh, never heard that.
I
I
never
heard
heard that
cymbal
before.
work and rides. I never even knew were in the song. Never,
Yeah.
I never knew they were even in the song.
Yeah.
Um,
Because
and
you
so you
could
just,
actually, I remember
and that was 1972, I think. Yeah.
when Roy Orbison brought out his last album before he passed away, and he had a song on there called Mystery Girl. This is like 85, I think, around that time. It was on CD. And it was written by Bono.
Hmm.
And I could actually hear, now this was on CD in my car, but I could hear, and that's because I picked it up as a guy that does all this stuff. I could
Yeah.
hear the tape machine come on, the hiss of the tape machine.
Yeah.
Because my first record was recorded on tape at
Yeah.
30 IPS. And I said to my
Yeah.
producer, I said, that was back when you had a lot of pen. We converted it to digital, but he said, yeah, we're going to 30 inches per second. And at that level, you don't need much Dolby because it just goes
So,
away.
so the record label side of it, we've kind of pushed pause on it the last couple of years that we run around the clock, 24 hours a
Yeah.
day at the plant. And so there's really not enough time to do other things, but which is great. It's not a problem. It's just the way it is. But when we first started up, when we first started the plant side, we were still working with a lot of artists, and so we did three compilations, and we called them analog sessions. And it was the coolest thing. We recorded. It's not there any longer in Deep Ellum, called Fairlog Studios. And it was an all analog studio. The computer, I think there was a computer there, but it was used for email or something. And so we bring in all these bands. They'd record direct to tape, and then sitting there for the mixing and mastering process. So there was no mixing because you had to get it right the first time. We'd bring the band in, do a couple sound checks.
Right.
When they had it right,
That
this
was
is
it.
live.
Yeah.
That's it.
Go for it.
And then I remember the mixing side, which was really cutting what track was track 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like we
Hmm.
talked about earlier. How you had to be really thoughtful and mindful of it. Was the longest because I mean it was literally the engineer would sit there with a razor blade, cutting, putting leader tape in, cutting, putting leader tape in. If there's any mistakes, sorry about you, that's staying in. And it was the coolest process. And then we took that to our friends at Welcome 1979 in Nashville, and they also are analog and they do cutting and plating in house. And they did it direct, never touched the computer, came right to us at the pressing plant. We pressed it. And we only made limited copies. It's been gone for years and we probably should remake it. But it was just the coolest process that never touched a computer. It's so warm. The mastering didn't exist. It was literally the cutting engineer was the
Yeah.
mastering engineer. And just that process. And it was, you said it earlier, a pain. Talk about tough recording to tape. And I think artists still do it because they like the challenge. In the sphere of everybody can sit with a laptop, hit a couple buttons, and become a YouTube star or whatever.
Yeah.
I think people still like to work for things. I think people like to make it hard on themselves because then they earn it. And that's kind of what vinyl represents. That's what analog in general represents. And
You
that's
know what?
probably why people buy it in droves.
Is it true? And this is what I've always heard. It's hard to get the actual pellets. That was one of the problems I'd heard at one time was trying to get the actual vinyl pellets. Well, it's not really vinyl, is it? What is it actually made out of? Is it poly?
No, it is. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Polyvinyl chloride. That's
Okay.
correct. So,
Is it hard to get
um,
that now? Has that changed?
no, it's not hard. And as the business has grown, it's roughly 14% of the music business now. I mean, it's a it's a
That's
billion and a
big.
half dollar industry,
Yeah.
which 10 years ago it was I don't know 100 million maybe or something. So it's a big segment. And so you have compounders. They're called compounders that make PVC. PVC is it's a durable plastic. It's the pipes in the ground. It's wall coverings, roofing materials,
Right.
um, uh, uh, the things that go around wires typically in your house is all made of
Yep.
PVC. So there's a lot of compounders out there. The difference is the compound we use uses a lot of waxes and olefins, so it's because it has to be very smooth and lubricant as it
Hmm.
goes through the press, so it doesn't make surface noise. And so the technology with that has actually grown exponentially in the last since we started. Meaning, like, you want a translucent red record, or an opaque red record, or a completely clear, looks like glass record, versus a black record or a natural record. They all now can sound the same because the compound has gotten so much better because these providers that are very, very specific to the vinyl industry make some really good stuff. So they basically went what, and I'm not a compounder, but what they've told me is, kind of went to where paint for cars. So
Hmm.
think about how much that's changed in the
Oh
last
yeah,
10 years,
huge.
right?
It's huge. Yeah, yeah.
Right. And so the way that they can get more and more granular with it allows for those pigments to not make as many issues for what we do. So, there's a lot of complications in record pressing. I mean, it's an insane. If you were to say, like, "Hey, start this as a business," you're a crazy person. It is insanely difficult to make a good record, and just the equipment side and the personnel and all the training. And it's very craft oriented. It takes years and years to learn, and it's insanely expensive, prohibitively, really, if you can't run really high volumes. So, all that said is not to like crush anybody's dreams that is watching this or whatever, but
No, no, no. But they
just
need to know.
just
I
know
mean,
that's
yeah,
how it is. And so what you're talking about, like PVC being hard to find, guys that can make really good plates, like what we talked about,
right.
the actual lacquers themselves. I mean, there was a huge lacquer fire in 2019 there was only one US based lacquer manufacturer, and there was one in Japan, two in the world.
And
Okay.
when I'm
I said
burnt.
to one on burned down to the ground in California. So it was $1.5 billion industry based on, if you can't start the process, you can't end the process, right?
No,
If you
no.
can't get a lacquer, you can't cut a lacquer. I can't get a plate. I can't make anything. We all go bye bye overnight, right? One fire. But people found out and they solved the problem. It's just how this business is. It's
Well,
you break
there's a
something
need
here, you,
now.
you got to
There's a
have
need.
local guys. It's you break stuff. There's only two press manufacturers on the planet, right? That actually make record presses.
Oh
So
wow.
guess what? If one of those guys go out, or if they
Yeah.
can't get parts for 6 months, or we can't get another record press we wanted, or we can't get parts to fix the broken one that we broke last week, or whatever. And by the way, we break stuff every about 4 hours. So that kind of
Wow.
tells you how crazy that is.
Do you?
You have
And
to
I'm
have
sure.
in-house
And
people fix it. So
yeah, I was going to say investors are not going to jump on it until they figure out what's going to happen. I'm sure. I mean, if you got, they're going to sit back and go, yeah, this looks good, but we've already been through 72 different generations of what people listen to as far as that goes. All right, so
yeah,
let me ask you a technical or logistic question. This is another thing they
sure,
told me. I come to
sure.
you and I go, Destin, I'm going to get an album out. I need, let's say 10,000. Let's just pick that number out. I give you the order. How long is it going to be before I get it?
Yep. So it does not actually matter 10,000, 300,
It doesn't matter.
500,000.
Okay.
Doesn't matter. Um, well, let me back up. Anything over 10,000, it could matter just for how
Okay, but I
long it
just picked that
physically
number or
takes.
whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
But
Yeah.
let's say it's 10,000 and under, all the way down to 300.
Right.
Um, the fastest you're going to get is 8 weeks from the
Well,
time
that's
that
not
you actually
bad. That's
give me
not
the
bad.
stuff.
That's
Yeah,
not
it
bad.
was, by the way, in September last year, it was 8 months.
I knew that because people told me that. The artists
That's
I've
right.
dealt with, I'd say, "Oh, and we're going to bring it on vinyl," but I had to. Let's see, our record came out. We're going to have to wait till it's January. We're going to have to
Yep.
release it in October. Why? Because the vinyl takes me that long to get.
Yeah, so last year, in about the September time period, we were booking June for this year, and we were
So
turning
what's
away a lot of.
changed? What's changed?
So there's been more providers. So there's effectively six really huge plants on the planet, and they all doubled down and got huge and bigger. We went from huge to more huge. And so what's thankfully happened is the majors, which is, Adele, Taylor Swift, all those really big bottleneck things, which had always had their orders there. They were also parsing their orders out everywhere they could go. There were so many COVID albums was one that all these artists were locked up for such a long period of time. When they
Yeah.
came out of it, they
Yeah.
had more material than they ever had.
Yep.
That was part
Yep.
one. Supply chain was part two. You couldn't
Yep.
get this, you couldn't get that. Everything
Yep.
slowed down. I
Yep.
broke something. I couldn't get cardboard. I couldn't get PVC. Whatever it was all an issue during this time period as well. So coming out of that time period, it just absolutely exploded. And the demand went so far through the roof, and nobody had the answers for it, that everybody on the planet was 8 months, 6 months, 8 months,
Wow.
10 months, a year. And then what happened in about the December, January time period, January this year, December last year, some of these really big plants started finally opening up more lines of
Mm.
production.
Hmm.
So then the majors could funnel those really huge jobs that were clogging everybody up through them. Also, everybody overbought this time last year because they couldn't get records in time.
Yeah.
So whereas our average order value was like 1,000 units,
Right.
all of a sudden it jumped to 5,000. So
Wow.
now we physically 1,000 units takes us 10 hours on a one press minimum, right? So 10 hours of physical time. So guess what? 5,000 is 50 hours on one press, and on
Gotcha.
it goes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you can't speed it up. That's as fast as it is,
Yeah.
and that's how long
Gotcha.
it takes.
Yeah.
And so you have all that. Everything on the back end of the pressing is still hand assembly. So we have 35 employees here, and we have two full-time packing teams. So for 18 hours a day, all they do is pack records by hand. They quality check each album by hand, right? Put it, sleeve it by hand, jacket it by hand,
With
goes on a
white
rack.
gloves on. I bet you they all have
Actually,
gloves on. Yeah.
black rubber
Black glove.
gloves, actually,
Black
because
actually.
white leaves white
Oh,
residue.
okay. So they have to have gloves on. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then
latex gloves and non-latex. Yeah,
so I'm an artist and I go, oh, I want to do this. First off,
yep,
it's not cheap. Well, I mean, it's easy for people to put stuff
no,
on Spotify because you can do it yourself, right? Unless you're
that's right.
big timer and you get your own producer and all that stuff.
Sure.
Um, but the other thing about it for me is the fact that looking at it, people want the vinyl, but I look at it and go, okay, so I come to you and I go, I got an album. Here's my album art. I assume you can do everything for a person, for an artist. I mean, you probably have access to your printers and all that stuff because when you get that, you got to put it in the sleeve. You got to put it in one
Yeah,
sleeve and then put it in the album. Then you got to shrink wrap it. I guess they still
yep,
shrink wrap them.
that's
So,
exactly
so
right.
I assume that that artist comes to you, you can do it all for them, or at least job it out and get everything from A to
You
A to
got
Z.
it.
Okay.
Yeah. So we so it's changed over time as well. So we start off as just solutions based. Like we'll take the whole order, we'll figure out what all the behind the scenes stuff is, and just give you the finished record, right? We found that over time that especially smaller independent artists like to be involved in the very deep particulars when it comes to their jackets, their printed inner sleeves or inserts. So we actually now, and this has been about the last 12 months, we don't let them. We just say, hey, here's the best printers we know.
Ah,
Use these
okay.
guys
Right.
because you will be happier dealing directly with them because you going to us and saying, oh, I don't, is this really the right red? I don't
Yeah.
know. What's the spine? What's the
Yeah.
font supposed to be? Then I have to go to the printer, talk to the printer,
Yeah.
come back to you, talk to you, go back to the printer, back and
Right.
forth we go for the amount of legwork and back and forth can be frustrating. So we find that it's been a lot better that we just say, hey, artists, here's these printer options in the US. There's only three of them anyways in the whole US or North America, not even US, in North America. And here's where you go, right?
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and so then they go to them and they work it all out. And we just say, when the jackets are here, we know we can actually press the record. The audio is much simpler because typically it comes from a professional audio engineer,
Hmm.
and then we send it right off to a preferred cutter. So there's several cutters in the U.S. We use that one I mentioned earlier in Nashville mainly when somebody just comes and says, "Hey, here's some digital files," because we
Right.
work with them daily, and so
Yeah.
any issue we can bounce it back and forth. We do, I don't know, a couple dozen jobs with them every week that can bounce back and forth. This didn't get approved. Resend us this. Hey, this is approved. Send us more. So it's just ease for workflow on that. But there are a lot of really amazing cut engineers that just have literally a lathe in their studio, and then they send it to a few plating houses. There's 5 plating houses in the U.S. that actually do those plates for us as pressing guys.
Right.
So all that said, usually the audio we'll take on, just to give us your files, we'll take care of it. Printers, we let them do it, and then the center label, that paper center label in the middle, we
Hmm.
actually have a proprietary thing that we sell it to other plants because it is paper. We find it's kind of a crazy archaic process. When we started, you get a center label, and you would have to bake it literally in an oven okay, like a easy bake oven, okay,
Wow.
over on the side
Yeah.
to cook out the moisture so that when into your record press, you wouldn't burn it and it wouldn't explode in the record press. It would literally break apart like this and stick to your stamper. You'd stop, clean off the stamper,
Wow.
and get the
That's
next one
just
in and
so,
do it
it's
again.
amazing to me.
And so we made some bakeless proprietary ones that we sell to other plants, and they literally take them out of the box and go put them in the press, and they go.
So I assume
They
the
don't
heat
change
is what
color.
adheres it to the
Yeah.
record. It didn't have
Yep.
to have
Yep.
adhesive on it, just the heat.
No adhesive at
Cast.
all. Exactly.
It just sticks on there because of the heat.
It gets melted into the plastic. And so when we have discards, we actually recycle. So it's all post-industrial recycling here in-house. So anything that doesn't pass QC and any excess flash, like when you talked about the cutting table, the
Yeah.
excess that hits the ground, right?
Yeah.
That gets reground back up and goes right back into the record
Into
press.
it.
Yep.
All right. What's your goal now? I mean, you're already running 24/7.
Yep. So, well, crazy enough,
I mean, I assume, let me ask you this real quick. So I assume the
yeah.
big labels have
Yep.
their own companies they go to.
Yeah.
What are you searching for in your niche, so to speak, in your business model that you have?
Yeah, I mean, sadly, we have one quick thing we have to address, which is it's not quick, it's going to be painful. We have to move in like 18 months. So
Wow.
this operation we built over all these years is just the way that the landlord's moving things around. So we have to take all this stuff, which is not like you take it out of the wall and plug it in somewhere else.
I can
It
imagine.
is, oh, it's huge. So the infrastructure and the whole thing. So the cool part is we get to re-envision the next home. And rebuild and do all that stuff. We'll continue to run here while we're building the other place and then swap it all over. So we got a little time to do that, which is actually exciting. So that's been kind of our short term, 18-month vision. Hey, we got to do that.
Right.
But on the long term, yeah, I mean, I think we doubled and tripled 4 times in the last 2.5 years. So before that move, we were going to be done doing that. Now that we have to move financially, you go, well, we might as well just grow a little bit again because
Yeah.
it's so expensive to move. You might as well add a couple more lines.
Right.
So we'll probably grow a little bit. We do a good mix of major indies, touring artists, small artists, and a little bit of major label work too. And so it's been a good relationship with everybody. And actually, the majors are really great to work with. They're at least the size of stuff that we do with them. We're not doing the mega stars, right?
Right.
But we do like healthy runs of things that like I even know who they are, which is I'm gonna be 44, so I'm like, I stopped paying attention a while ago
Yeah, I
of who the
understand
new
that.
artists are,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
Gotcha.
but it's been pretty fun. So just continue to grow with those guys. I mean, our big focus early on was just I said it earlier, like solving the problem, right? And then the backside of that has just been now it's just communication and quality. Like we're really well known as like a very high quality provider. We're more expensive than most pressing plants because of that. But we literally pay, we're just one at a time. And so it's laborious. It's a lot of people, a lot of, like I said, craft. I've said that a few times, but it's not a just hit go and they're spitting out and then they're out the door. I mean, they're on the floor for a long time after they're made, being checked, inspected, so that we don't get returns. The customers aren't unhappy. Their customers, which is the actual music fan, isn't unhappy with them. It's just we don't let anything leave that has a pop or a hiss or is off center or wobbly or
Well, not only that, people are paying
it's a
$30
big
or
deal.
whatever it is for an album, at least. So
Absolutely.
it's not, they're not buying, they're not, like you said, Pandora, they're not downloading or putting on a playlist.
It's a
I can
big
listen to
deal. You're the man. Thank
all
you.
right. Thanks so much. Take care. We'll see you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that's it for this episode of The Trout Show. Thanks so much for listening. A special thanks to Dustin Blocker with Handdrawn Pressings and Handdrawn Records for sitting down and talking to me about this fascinating subject. For more information about Handdrawn, if you're wanting to get some records pressed, reach out to him at handdrawnpressings.com, all word, one word, or handdrawnrecords.com, all one word. Also, a very big thanks to David Smith with Everett Jones for continually supporting our podcast. If you want more information about The Trout Show, you can visit us at troutshow.com and you can find out about our other podcasts and YouTube videos. So until next time, people, you know what I always say. It's only rock and roll, but I love it. See ya.